Hello everybody, this is Fun Police, and I am bringing you today another Cards review over the new World at War mini set. I want to apologize before we get into it about the lack of content. Over the last week, I got actually quite sick and was pretty much unable to record. And as such, I simply uploaded some videos over a game I'd been playing, Steel Division, that I had pre-recorded at a point, and pretty much used those to fill it. And, I know that was the first times that I've done Steel Division, but, I did want to do more cards content. It just ended up not working out because I couldn't talk. In fact, you probably still hear some of that in my voice in this video, so I apologize for that if it sounds a bit worse than it normally does. But I do want to get this out since we just got the reveals done in yesterday, essentially. So, regardless, I'm going to jump into it right away with the Bryansk Irregulars. So these are a 2-credit, 1 operation cost Soviet infantry. It's a limited. It has 0 attack, 6 health, guard, and destruction. Deal 3 damage to each unit that dealt damage to this unit this turn. So these are another 2-drop defensive tool for the Soviets. And we actually do have a fair amount of those already. Most notably, Mobile Defense and the 845th Rifles are both cards that do see a decent amount of play in Soviet control. So where does the Irregulars fit in? Well, I think they do serve a bit of a unique purpose. Most notably, the other 2 cards have elements of what the Irregulars offer, but they don't have them combined. Mobile Defense obviously has the guards and is similar to the Irregulars in that it's often going to be dealing damage. It only sticks around for a little bit, but it deals good damage and can help clear the board if the enemy isn't able to remove it through orders. Similar thing to the Irregulars. While on the other hand, something like the 845th Rifles, although it doesn't have guard, it is a modestly statted 2-drop that also adds some healing onto it. So instead of having a guard, you're instead healing yourself a little bit. And overall, I think Irregulars kind of fits in a third area. Unlike Mobile Defense, which only sticks around for that one turn, the Irregulars do stick around until the enemy deals with it. And unlike the 845th, the Irregulars do have guard, meaning that they're a more proactive play in blocking the enemy. 845th is nice, no doubt, but in some matchups, you're going to really want to have guard to block something, and 845th doesn't give you that. So I think the Irregulars could serve a nice purpose as a stall tool. Most notably, you can essentially play this on turn 2. It'll just stay on the board until the enemy deals with it. And if they attack into it and have to kill it with units, then you're getting, 3 damage on it. And a 2-credit 3/6 infantry honestly is not bad. I do think it is going to largely be left to a sort of meta call as to which of the 2-drop Soviet defensive ones you want. Because Mobile Defense, for example, does have much more purpose against, say, control decks, because you're able to turn that card into 6 damage in the mid to late game. Irregulars doesn't really ever turn into a threat. But against aggro, the Irregulars do seem quite powerful. They overall are going to, just force the enemy to either trade into it and then potentially lose a couple units, or they put it down to like 1 to 2 health, and then on the next turn use an order to finish it off, which does work. But honestly, if you play down a 2-credit card, the enemy aggro deck has to spend time trading into it and then has to pass without doing all of their attacks because of the Irregulars. That's already kind of a win for you, especially if you can back it up with more guards, or you're able to board clear the turn after. I think there is quite a lot of value in that. Of note, the Irregulars can also trade in when they're on low health, and if they attack into something, then they'll essentially deal 3 damage to it. So you can actually kind of use this guy to finish off something important if the enemy has gotten him low on health. So overall, I think the Irregulars does fit into a deck like Soviet Value quite well. Again, it is going to compete with the other two drops, but I think that it does have enough pros to it that you're able to, I think, make a real justification as to it appearing in a couple copies of Soviet Value. Maybe we'll do a 2-2-2 split, 2 Irregulars, 2 mobile defense, and 2 845ths. Could be an interesting thing to try out. Moving on, we get Chasing Shadows. This is a 0 credit French order. It is a limited, and target unit moves into the front line if possible. This is a card that I could honestly probably make a whole video about. I'm very excited for this because I think there's just a lot of applications with Chasing Shadows. There's a lot of things that this actually pairs really well with if you look into it. The first thing we'll talk about, I guess, is the fact that it's able to pull enemy units into the front line. Being able to pull something like a bomber or an artillery piece into the front line or from behind guards is actually quite powerful. It's a tool that could potentially open these cards up to something... could open these cards that like to sit around on the board for a long time and essentially make them easy kills. Off the top of my head, stuff like the 1 credit 0-4 elites are good. The Polish Kards, which is that bomber that continually adds the Section 2s to your hands. You also have anything in Smokescreen, really. You could potentially just have a big artillery piece or something similar. There's, I think, just a lot of applications for that. But I think the cooler aspect is when you use it on your own units. There's a fair amount of cards that really benefit from being moved into the front line. Most of these are in the U.S., and those include things like the 5th Infantry Regiment, which is a 2-3 that gets +1/+1 and it moves into the front line. You have the 7th Regiment that draws a card when it moves into the front line. You even have the Sherman, which, although itself does not benefit, if you can use shadows on a friendly US unit, put it into the front line, and then you can draw with the Sherman. And you can also even do something like the Chaffee, which is honestly the best play. Let's be real here. Playing Chaffee on turn 3 and moving it into the front line with Chasing Shadows is the ultimate power move. Honestly, I expect it to become the new Tier 0 strategy. Slam Chaffee down turn 3, Chasing Shadows it, and the enemy will concede because you are just such a... just the power of that move is unsurmountable. In reality, though, I think that it does have some purpose there, but it also has purposes in other nations. Most notably, Germany has a few cards that really benefit from this. I think of note, the Panthers are really strong with it. The Panther A, when it moves into the front line, denies the enemy card draw. Chasing Shadows goes very well with that. It also works with the other Panther, being able to immediately jam it into the front line, and that's actually got a lot of power behind it, because one of the weaknesses of the Panther G, the one that can't be targeted by orders, is the fact that it is often slow and weak to retreat effects. Chasing Shadows does that, and I think that actually does have some real power behind it. Not to mention, you also could do that with the Tigers, you can do that with something else like the Panzerzug if you wanted to. So I think that Chasing Shadows is honestly a very interesting card. I'm very excited to experiment with all this in a lot of different decks. Especially because France has not gotten to do pretty much anything besides Resistance and Mobilize for so long now. And Chasing Shadows now potentially is offering that new avenue, especially because we also have the Hotchkiss H35 that got reworked, which could be a decent little aggro card. And then you also have Phony War, and Phony War is a very, very strong card, being able to refill your hand very quickly. So, you could definitely pair that with Chasing Shadows to undo any damage to your hand size that Chasing does cause. So I think that, maybe the deck's not there yet. Maybe there's not a deck that can fully abuse this, but I think that it's a very cool card, and I'm excited to get my hands on it and try it out. Then we move on to the next one, the Commandos Kiefer. We'll go with that. It is another French card. It is a 2 credit, 1 operation cost, 0/1 infantry. It is a special. It has mobilize and smokescreen, and deal 1 damage to a random enemy when your HQ gains defense. So this is a interesting card. Gaining defense in incremental amounts, I think for most people that, have played this game, brings up 2 cards to mind. The British M4 or M3A4 Honey, and the 6311 Potez. I hope I got those numbers right. Anyway, those 2 cards are very, very good at just essentially gaining you a lot of life in incremental amounts. And I think Kiefer actually is going to potentially merge the mobilized deck lists with potentially a commando style deck lists. Now, there is definitely some consideration for that, but Kiefer has a lot of power behind it. Being able to essentially act as an extra commando in a commando deck is very nice. It does take maybe a little bit more effort because you have to spend, you have to have a honey out in order to activate it. That can be something that's not uncommon, especially if you hold and can save it to a mid-game burst in a similar manner to how you do regular commandos. And then you also have it in Mobilize, which I think it's honestly quite a good one in Mobilize. Mobilize has the Potez, obviously, and the Potez has that every time you play a Mobilize unit, you draw a card and gain +1 or gain +2 defense on your HQ. And obviously that'll activate Kiefer. And they also have a lot of very cheap 0 credit or 1 credit Mobilize units. So you can play this guy out and hopefully get, maybe 2 to 3 activations of them on the turn you play him. And then if the enemy can't deal with it, then you do it all over again in the next turn. I think that there's definitely going to be a lot of experimentation with trying to merge the British Commando deck with the Mobilized deck, because the one problem that I see with it is that you don't have as many orders when you're trying to fit in a bunch of mobilized units. Obviously, France is pretty much going to have to commit fully to this mobilized thing, or very close to it, so they're not going to be able to offer many orders. And the other side is that the British are going to have to run some mobilize also, so they have less room for orders. Will Kiefer make up for maybe that lacking order amount for your regular commandos? It's hard to say. But I do think that it is overall an interesting card that is potentially going to show up in a couple decks. Personally, I gotta admit, I'm not the biggest fan of commandos or mobilize for that matter, so I'm not super excited about this, but I know some people really do enjoy those decks, and hopefully that fits well in there. Then we have the Lasander Poland. It is a 2 credit, 1 operation cost Polish fighter. It has 1 attack and 2 health. It is a British exile. It has Intel 2 on it, and when the enemy plays a known card, deal 1 damage to the enemy HQ. That is a very interesting effect on the Lasander. Obviously, it being a British exile means that this is another card for the British Legion deck that has Intel on it and can be ran in British slots. And that effect is a bit interesting, because being able to have a 2 credit way to activate Intel and then you deal, say, maybe 1 or 2 points of damage onto the enemy HQ could matter. It could be an important thing. Plus, it's also a fighter, so it can technically block bombers. So it might just have enough oomph behind it in order to be, I think, a real consideration in that deck. However, I also think that maybe we could see this in something like Japanese Legions, which has been a deck that really came around over the last patch. And although I don't think it's top tier, I think it might look at the Lasander, because Japan Legions cares much more about that burn damage, because they're looking to eventually kill you. They don't want to just like outlast you. They want to, essentially kill you. And the Lasander being able to add maybe 1, 2, 3 damage to that while still being an intel card could be a very real play. I think overall, though, the Lasander serves as an interesting card and fits well into Legion decks or Intel decks. I think you could maybe consider this in something like an Intel deck if you really wanted to commit to the Intel thing without Legions, but really the only options for that are like the Inniskilling Fusiliers and the Sherman PL, and those aren't like the worst thing, but they're also not particularly amazing, especially when you just compare it to Legion. So I don't think that this will end up helping like an Intel-based deck in any way. But the Lasander, I do think could potentially show up in a couple different Intel or Legion decks. Then we move on to the Elite of the expansion, and this card has, I've seen, been a very divisive thing. It is a 5-credit Soviet order. It is an elite, and it's I'm gonna butcher this, but Monastir. I'm gonna go with that. Destroy and replace every enemy unit with a unit from the same nation, costing 1 less if possible. An important note is that if a unit cannot be downgraded, it is not affected. So, for example, the Italian 8-credit unit La Decima is a 8-credit unit, but Italy does not have any 7-credit units. So the La Decima is not affected by this because there's no 7 credits to turn into. Monastir is, I think, a really interesting card. This effect can potentially be very disruptive to pretty much, certain boards, especially people are bringing up how this is like the game ender against like decks like Alpine and Legions and various other things. And to an extent, I can see that, but it is notable that you'd still leave them with a board. And many aggro decks can just make that work and beat you to death with those units, especially when you're spending 5 credits to do so. But it does potentially have some real power, at disrupting certain decks. So it's a very hard card to judge, I will be honest. But I do think that the high credit cost and the fact that it doesn't remove anything does indeed balance out its ability to break up synergies in various decks. But I do really like how much you kind of got to think about this. I really like how you have to consider something such as you really got to consider something like, if you downgrade, this unit, what is it going to turn into? And then you got to do that with every single unit. So you don't accidentally, turn that, specific card, you don't turn that ISU 152 into a 272nd Guards, and then you got to deal with an extra IS2. And I think that's a really cool thing that people are going to have to consider and weigh on top of the normal decisions. I think it's going to be a very skill-testing card. And I do overall think, though, that it'll probably end up in Soviet value, or it's going to at least be a very strong consideration for Soviet value. I do think that if the meta shifts in certain ways, Monastir becomes not as realistic to bring, but in the right meta, especially one that has a lot of buffs going on, kind of like what's currently here with like British Air, I think Monastir does actually command a spot in the deck. Then we have Surahs Gate, or Surahs Gate. It is a 2-credit Soviet standard order, and it pins target unit and deals 2 damage to adjacent units. Many people have drawn parallels between this and Bombing Raid, the Japanese elite that deals 3 to a unit and 2 to adjacent, and I do have to agree, for the most part. Surahs Gate is not as powerful as Bombing Raid because it cannot target HQs. It has no effect on enemy HQs, which means that a smart player with good positioning is able to play around this. If you play units to the left and right of the HQ, it gets incredibly hard to get much value out of this. 2 credits for a pin is barely worth it, and only in like extreme circumstances, so you got to get some damage on adjacent units, and a smart player could work around that. I think there is a lot of power to the gate. when you are able to combine it and put it or use it on the front line. Because you're obviously going to be able to pin, and then there's no HQ to block stuff, so you're going to be able to damage adjacent units. But I do think that it is very interesting as a positional card. I think players are going to really struggle with this at first. I think it's... Honestly, I do expect a lot of people to call this OP and too strong of like a removal card until they start playing around positioning, because up to this point, Cards has not had a lot of positioning. So I'm actually really, really happy that Surahs Gate is seemingly going to start making people care about how they position their units, because that is a real thing in Cards that just doesn't get explored enough. And I hope that it gets more cards like this that make people instead of just slamming a card wherever, instead they think a little bit more, and they have to consider, okay, if I move this unit next to this unit, Surahs Gate might end up getting this stuff killed, and maybe so I want to put it over here, or in between these two. I think it's a very interesting design. And power level-wise, I do think it is actually quite good. Pretty good against aggro. And because it does always pin, it can be useful against control to slow down some big threat. But I do think it being awkward in the support line can actually matter. So it's an interesting card. I think there will be a couple copies that show up in something like Soviet value. Maybe not the most present card, but I think definitely good enough to warrant including at least a few slots into. And then the final card is the second Parac. It is the British Special. It is a 2-credit, 1 operation cost infantry. It has 1 attack, 4 health. It has Fury and Pincer. Units dealt combat damage by this unit are destroyed. Very similar to the first Commandos from Theaters of War, which was a 2-credit, 1/3 infantry that destroyed any units that it damaged. Second Para has that pincer effect, which I do think is overall much faster and much stronger, because you're able to play that on like a bomber or an artillery piece and essentially make them insta-kill any enemy unit. That gives Second Para some very strong tempo options, and I think makes the card actually quite strong. I think honestly this will start showing up in British Air and a copy or two of it, because just being able to turn your random dinky swordfish or whatever other small bomber you have into an insta-kill to kill big old guards or something can be quite powerful. I think that Second Para is definitely better as a tempo tool than as a control tool, because Pincer's a lot harder to pull off early on with control decks, and I think that's where like the difference between the Para and the Commandos are. The Commandos are like a proactive 2-drop, and they also have smoke screen, so they can't be traded into unless you choose to. While the second Para will end up kind of dying if the enemy can swing into it. So I think that overall the second Para definitely is going to see play. Brit Air I think is definitely going to be interested in it, and I think that other British more aggressive decks will honestly consider Second Para, just so you can essentially spend a unit to trade into another unit, even if that does mean the Second Para ends up not having the effect itself. And with that is all the cards. Or as I should say, those are all the new cards, because there is also the premium artwork that we've seen. We've got Reserves, Arming the Resistance, and MI5. I always enjoy the new alternate arts. For whatever reason, I feel like they're just so much more colorful than most of the regular art. And I always find them so interesting to look at. MI5's got to be my favorite out of this batch. I really like how this is drawn in the colors and just the way it's about secret operatives. I think it's a very cool card, alternate art. But otherwise, down in the comments below, tell me which one of these new cards you're most excited to try out. For me, it's probably got to be Chasing Shadows. I just really like how that potentially opens up a variety of interesting deck building decisions. It's giving France some more opportunities to try stuff. Also, let me know which one of these three alternate artworks you like the most. I'm always curious as to what people like. Are you going to get the alternate artworks? I know they're only available in the premium bundle, so they're a bit expensive, but, you know, I'm a big fan of having a little bit of bling in the game, so I'll probably end up getting these. But otherwise, that is going to be all for today. Look out in the future as I'm going to jump back on the content train and probably do a deck tech shortly after the expansion drops. Looking at some of these new cards and messing around with them. But otherwise, I want to thank you so much for watching and have a good day.